have made housing and homelessness a central part of the campaign. So what specifically would you do if you were elected governor to make those situations better? We'll start with you, Rep. Drazen.
Thank you. You know, when it comes to the approach that we've taken in the last decade or so, it really has been a housing first approach. And I give Speaker Kotek credit in particular for the changes that she made to land use laws to make the opportunity available for more dense housing. That wasn't something that my community wanted, and as a state representative, I voted against that bill, but I see the need for it. I also recognize, though, that when it comes to the homeless challenges, that approach wasn't the right approach to take singularly. A housing first approach is not the challenge, is not all that's involved in our homeless crisis. And to just simply mess around with land use and fund more tiny homes isn't going to get it done. So I will declare a homelessness state of emergency on day one of my administration, because what I believe actually needs to happen is a better understanding of who is on our streets and what they need for services and supports, and to ensure that the state is in fact supporting local governments. They're under this Ninth Circuit Court ruling, which is tying their hands day after day. It feels like it gets tighter and tighter on them. And I believe that the state needs to intervene and provide a way out for local government so that we can in fact begin to see progress on our streets. That means compassion and accountability.
So what specifically would be, we've lived under a housing emergency in this city for 7 or 8 years, and as far as I can tell, it hasn't changed anything. So what would the effect of the governor declaring a housing emergency actually be?
So you guys, you're talking about a housing emergency. I'm talking about a homelessness emergency.
Okay.
So to be clear, those are two very different things. One has to do with land use, one has to do with permitting. What I'm talking about is the idea that you can marshal state resources from DHS and OHA and the housing entities, and you can collaborate across platforms, across jurisdictions, and to begin to clear the decks to get people into the supports that they need. And the other side of that has to be that in the end, you have met the threshold that the courts require of us, and that local governments are in fact allowed to make sure that our streets are clear and our public spaces are clear, because people are choosing to not voluntarily go into what's available to them. They then would have the capacity to be able to restore open streets again. And right now that's not possible.
Thank you. Speaker Kotek, what specifically would you do if you were elected?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, and I do think the housing and homelessness crisis are related, but let's particularly talk about people who are unsheltered, because I do think that is the question of the moment. Back in 2019, at the end of 2019, the state issued a report on unsheltered homelessness, and it was striking. We are, compared to other states, we have a high percentage of people who are consider themselves homeless who are actually unsheltered, and it's obviously gotten worse. So after reading that report, and Oregon puts a lot of reports out, but I actually read it, I came into the 2020 session in January of 2020, and I said, we got to do something about this. And that was nearly 3 years ago, and I called for a homelessness state of emergency back in 2020. Came into the February 20 session with specific investments in navigation centers, which was a recommendation for communities outside of Portland, frankly, from Eugene, Springfield, to Bend, Salem, McMinnville. So communities outside of Portland could also do their part to address unsheltered homelessness. $100 million more affordable housing in that session, plus a policy bill that said let's try to expedite permitting for shelters. That was my plan going into the 20 session. And what happened was, as we all know, nothing happened. Governor Brown didn't do anything, and the session fell apart when the Republicans walked out, and we really lost momentum. I mean, I can't tell you the people who said to me, now what, right? When are we going to come back to this conversation? We lost probably an entire year of momentum of moving forward on addressing unsheltered homelessness. And of course, the pandemic hit, in March of 2020. Going forward, I have a plan on my website. I feel like I've given specific details as it relates to.
Right, I've read your plan, but please condense it for us.
I will. I won't go on.
Tell us
so one thing I think is important.
specifics.
So speaking not just in Portland speak is that when people lose their housing, it is preferable that they stay in their own communities because they have social capital there, they have networks of support. That's why I have supported services in other cities so people can stay in their communities, get services quicker, and get rehoused. So that is really important. In the metro area,
Can I get you to focus on what specifically you would
Absolutely.
do as governor? Because you're giving us a lot of background, a lot of history, which is
Absolutely.
great. What
Well,
would you
day
do?
one, I will concur. I'm going to go back to the same argument I made 3 years ago, which is we need a homelessness state of emergency for the purpose of bringing the urgency to the agencies to say, hey, there's a lot of things you have to do, but we have to move this issue of unsheltered homelessness to the front of your agenda because it's not happening. And locally, I think being in the issues here in Portland, right? Specifically funding more outreach teams. And I know people don't think that's the answer, but unless people living on the streets have someone they can communicate with and feel comfortable with, they're not going to get connected to services. You need to get connected to services, get into transitional housing, like converted motels that we at the state and through my leadership got done with Project Turnkey. We need more converted motels. People have to have safety of a room. Once they do, we can talk about getting into permanent housing. I was just at Blanchet House yesterday. You know, I asked them, I said, what do you need? Do you know what Portland needs right now? We need more showers and toilets. That is something we can do concretely here in Portland. And one thing that I will do, even before I'm sworn in, is have a hard conversation with Multnomah County about how they're assessing people on the street right now. We are assessing people and trying to house the highest need folks first, when the people who are more engaged go to the bottom of the list. We have to make progress. If you're engaged, have case management, or are working, you should be housed first, so we can then spend more time with the other people who need more services.
Okay.
We're just doing it backwards here, and we're not seeing enough progress.
Great. Okay, Senator Johnson, before I give your answer first, then I want to come back to Project Turnkey, because you and I have talked about that before. Please go ahead. What would you do if elected right away to address the homelessness issue and the housing issue?
Sure. Well, they got a preamble, so I'm going to take a little preamble.
Okay.
Unlike people that are planning and thinking about it and talking about it and declaring emergencies, I've been doing it. I'm part of the group that has reanimated the former Wapato and turned it into the Bybee Lakes Hope Center. Not without a considerable amount of controversy and no help from the county or the city when we first started. We were demonized for being high barrier. That happens to be a model that has worked, and it has worked successfully in the 11 other facilities that the not-for-profit that's running Bybee Lakes Hope Center has been running for damn near 20 years. So I'm not talking about it, I'm doing it, and I have done it previously. Tillamook was underwater when I was in the legislature, and we got quick action there. But especially Vernonia, 2 500-year floods in the space of a decade that literally wiped Vernonia off the map. We had a profound sense of urgency, began moving people in right away, moving in alternative housing. That's the thing that has been missing for me. So on the first day, the 9th, I would convene the key players, social services, law enforcement, addiction specialists, mental health specialists, city and county officials through AOC, the Association of Oregon Counties, and the League of Oregon Cities, so that we had more than just a Portland perspective. Make sure that we start assigning obligations, deliverables, dates when those projects or activities were supposed to be completed, budgets assigned, and people that were accountable to get those jobs done. We are creating, somebody told me, I haven't independently verified this, but somebody told me that we have closing in on 300 not-for-profits that are talking about homelessness with all of their concomitant costs, their executive directors, their development people, blah, blah, blah. And we're still better at pitching tents than pulling permits. And so I think creating a sense of urgency and accountability is going to be very important. And if the folks assigned to deliver on certain tasks don't, or they want to shift the blame to somebody else, get new people. That's been the problem that I've had with a lot of this. We just throw money at it. Look at how much money is sloshing around Multnomah County right now, but we're not moving the dial. I want to get a baseline. How many people are on the streets? What's the profile? Why are they there? Is it domestic violence? Is it addiction? Is it mental health? Is it criminality? And try to get a profile. And then, as Bybee Lakes has so successfully done, is try to begin to form solutions around individuals. It's going to be a slow slog, but I happen to agree that the one-on-one navigation of the system is something that folks are going to need. That's one of the benefits of Bybee Lakes as we aggregate mental health, physical health, and the services in one place.